Um, so then we have Patrick Shang, who's actually, allegedly breaking the gun and then going around and putting the different pieces in trash cans and in sewers around that West Side area. So, if we're to take that as fact, I mean, I'm sure that weapon is somewhere around, remnants of that weapon are somewhere around the West Side. If that is, if we're taking that as fact. Just trying to, as I try to remain objective here about kind of what happened. So you can see here, and kind of what happens is um, Shang sort of breaks apart the weapon, and then LaJoy and D'Argento were very suspicious of Shang, and he was very suspicious of them as well. Why does he know where the murder weapon is? Where that's, you put us in the electric chair in the future, and that feud kind of continues on by the time they're in jail in jail together over the next few years, because spoiler alert, all these people go to jail soon. So by 1965 they are all in prison, and then by 1968 they're either out in the witness protection program or still in prison. But so I wanted to get your kind of reactions on the second chapter now that I've kind of given a pretext for it.
So all of those details about the gun, which is super fascinating. How do we know all that? Like, is it because they ended up confessing when they were in prison later, or where
No,
did those facts
good
come
question.
from?
Yeah, good question. So you'll see at the beginning of the chapter, I wrote in italics, the following narrative is based on the descriptions of two eyewitnesses and the sworn testimony of two others. So there are two employees of the LaJoy Food Mart, Lawrence Kazopater and Michael Adante. I think I got those names right. They're actually working at the LaJoy Food Mart on March 14th, 1964, and they are Michael LaJoy's employees. And they told the police that he had been in the store all day. And so um, they are kind of the first uh, people who said, yeah, actually what happened was this. They came in and burned the masks, and it was actually, he wasn't working all day. And then also the inmates, Tajra and Felici, say the same thing. So it's four people who have said that this did not occur in the way that LaJoy's alibi said. It occurred in this sort of way where they rendezvous to the food mart and burn everything. And what you'll see too in part two is the same MO is when this crew does a robbery, they rendezvous at one of LaJoy's grocery stores. And so they did that in a separate um, robbery in 1963, 6 months before this. And we'll get into that more, but that's the same robbery that the 68 trial is based on. So two major robberies that we kind of talk about, and then one trial. So 63 bank robbery, 64 Golf Mill Sears, 68 trial, kind of where all these details are peppered in. So some pretty shocking details for sure.
But now the 68 trial is about the 63 Franklin Park bank robbery,
Yes,
but
yes,
then the 64 Golf Mill robbery and murder comes up in that trial.
yes, correct.
Okay.
And so um in advance of the 68 trial, and this is the reason that having the details and facts about Richard Kane and the kind of person he was and the kind of double dealer he is important to include, because it's up to you to decide when he is on trial in 1968, is he the kind of guy who is privy to all this inside information? And is he the kind of guy who would be able to, um, do something like get the inmates at Cook County Jail to put this story forward? Is he able to get those witnesses to repeal their alibis? It's things we have to consider too if we want to look at this fairly and objectively. Is this something that he was capable of sort of pulling off? Because only ahead of that 68 trial do we find out all of these details about March 14th, 1964, and they all are in the service of Richard Kane's defense in that trial, because he's trying to discredit these guys as witnesses against him, and impeach them as witnesses. So
Do we know when the employees finally decided to tell the truth? Was it like a year later?
right before the trial, same thing.
Right before, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
And those are two documents that I only I know what they consist of based on the court transcripts, but I haven't been able to actually find those uh those recanting of their alibis
And
physically.
it,
I've
oh,
looked everywhere.
wow, okay.
But they do say the judge, says, or maybe it's not the judge, but someone says, like, there's just so many sources in my head. I'm trying to remember what was which, but essentially it says these two people came forward. That's how I got their names, and they repealed their statements. So
That makes sense that, LaJoy was their boss, told them, and he's a member of the outfit, told them to say he had an alibi. Of course they would do that. And
But
then
now they might be, now the lawyers in the room know this better than I, but they might be then also charged,
mhm,
right, with helping to conceal evidence. So maybe that's why they recanted.
probably, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing to think that the gun might still be out there. It's just amazing.
yeah, um, I think uh it's a difficult thought, like, to think about that, that could just be there, and if they had accepted the testimony of Felici and Tajra and said the gun's over there, that maybe they could have put a search party together and to confirm something like that. Even if they
Right.
find one piece of a
One
gun, they could at
piece.
least say, yeah, this makes this more credible.
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure that takes, I feel like it just takes a lot more work for the police. And so they were, maybe, I mean, they didn't even receive the statement to begin with. So let alone do all that work. But
Well, and
you don't know where
Shang
it is either.
isn't Shang the only one who said that he broke the gun up? Maybe he didn't even break it up.
Um,
Or no, they broke it up in the store, right? They
No,
broke it up.
yeah, but LaJoy told an inmate that, and then the inmate came out with the story.
Okay,
right.
okay.
And I just think that's so specific that, like, you're breaking up the gun on the floor and you burn the masks in the sink. And like when I
Mhm.
see the specifics, I'm like,
Okay, yeah,
mix that up, but
yeah.
Yeah.
go ahead, Bill.
Did the inmates who told this story that LaJoy confessed to them while in the jail, did they get any benefit from the state in terms of their own cases or anything like that?
So it's a good question. So obviously we can all say that, yeah, they are self-motivated people. They're not necessarily just doing this for out of the good of their hearts. Um, what they said was, we want this to help the family. If and there was a reward still involved from Sears, and they said that reward should go to the family. So these guys, whatever their motives were, they did not receive any benefit from the testimony. Now they not only
Wow.
and not only did they give the testimony on recording to a Sears representative, John Shields, but then Kane brought them forward as witnesses in that 68 trial, and they told the same story on the stand. And so they've
Consistent.
they've done that's sworn testimony under oath, whatever that means for convicted, murderers. I don't know, but you know, essentially, they stuck with their story. And I think that's an important point too.
Did the employees, the LaJoie's employees that recanted their statement, that pretty much undercut his alibi, was that made to the Niles police?
As far as I know, there's just not a paper trail of it, so I just can't say for certain.
So, and then is that comes up in the trial though, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in the transcript, does it reference? I'm drawing a blank. Does it reference like a line of questioning, like your initial statement was A, and then 4 years later, right before trial, now your statement is B.
So yeah, so that's a good question. So they recanted their statements, and then Kane tried to bring those employees to the stand to continue to impeach the witness. But the judge by that point had had enough with Kane and bringing up the 64 murder that he was like, no, no, no. If these guys are who I think, or they're going to talk about what I think they're going to talk about, which is murder, this is a federal courtroom. We do not deal with murder. They're not coming on the stand. So those two guys, even though they were in the court, they never got to testify. But Kane got them all the way to the courthouse, which is, I mean, it's pretty amazing. At the same time, the witnesses that the government was using were like public enemy number one of the outfit. So anybody would testify against them at that point because there was no fear about like ratting or omerta or anything like that. So long answer is, or short answer is no, there was not anything specific like that.
Wait, sorry. So what is Kane's motive of bringing those two witnesses to that trial? To show that like he wasn't behind the
He's trying
60.
to, yeah, he's trying to impeach them as witnesses all together, and for the lawyers in the room are better at explaining what that is. But he's trying to basically like discredit the LaJoie, DiArgento, and Shang by saying they were all involved in this Sears murder, and these murderers, you're believing these murderers over me. And but then the judge was like, and the U.S. attorney was like, you can't just be saying those kinds of things without proof, without a conviction. But he got a lot into the court testimony. The problem was the jury was sequestered the whole time that these witnesses came up and tried to impeach the government's witnesses. The jury was sequestered.
Tom,
So-
remind me again, what was Kane on trial for, and why were these mobsters testifying against him?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it will lead into our next round of reading. It's really backwards actually. So these same guys, LaJoie, DiArgento, Shang, and another guy named Mendela, Loverboy Mendela, were all involved in that Franklin Park Bank robbery in September 1963. And the next set of readings or set of chapters will cover that. So you get more of a sense of what that's about. They did the crime. The feds got them for that crime, convicted them. The thing was, though, that the outfit was suspicious that one of those four guys was ratting and providing information to the government. So they ran a series of lie detector tests after the robbery. And the person who ran those lie detector tests was none other than Richard Kane, because he had a lie box. He had his own little private company where he was in the daytime using the lie detector to put people in prison while he was at the sheriff's office, and at nighttime he was using it for people like Hugh Hefner, and he was running it on Playboy bunnies who were accused of stealing from Hefner. He was using it for the outfit. So it's just, this guy is too much. But hopefully that basically, sorry, I'm just to finish that answer, Jim. The 68 trial is all about this. The people who committed the bank robbery and have been convicted are now coming back as witnesses and testifying against people who helped them cover up their crime. And then the people who covered up the crime are the ones who actually get convicted in the 68 trial. Kane included, and a few others.
Covered up the bank robbery.
Yeah, and I promise that will make a lot more sense as you read along too about kind of what happened in the robbery and the concealment. And I think right now it's just kind of we're talking about it conceptually, but that is covered in the next chapters. Want to talk a little bit about Richard Kane. There's never enough time to cover everything. Yeah, I've mentioned him in previous meetings in this group, but I mean, I don't think there's many people more fascinating in Chicago history than Richard Kane. And the fact that he's got his kind of fingerprints on Terry's case in a way is really mind-boggling. I think Carly, you just mentioned that you were on his Wikipedia page. That's worth a read. His Wikipedia page. He's a lot of people out there think that he's the one who actually killed John F. Kennedy in Dallas. And he is I think as we continue to follow him in the narrative, you should ask yourself, what he's capable of and what kind of interests is he willing to serve. He's always, in my opinion, serving his own self-interest, but he's privy to information that not many other people are, because he toes the line between law enforcement brass and outfit brass. And so he knows both worlds better than anybody. The way that
in a way that makes him like strangely credible.
I would say yes, but then I would also say he's also one of the biggest
Slippery.
Yeah, he's slippery and he's a manipulator.
Yeah.
I mean truly a brilliant person, like a lot of people called him like a genius.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also ruthless. And so you could see, like, from he went to the army, and then he just started, I think he got discharged from the army and then just began working in surveillance and just loved that. And he wanted to be a spy from an early age. And so that's what he became, and never stopped. He is a bona fide double agent throughout his whole career until his death in 1973.
Well, what makes me say that there is a credibility is that in 68, when he's trying to impeach the witnesses by bringing up Terry's murder, he's not bringing it up to say, hey, did you know this young man got murdered? There's no like justice. that's, or, you know, kind of unfinished business. He doesn't care about that. He's just using all that information for his own ends, which to me makes that strangely credible, because he's not trying to build a case against them. He's just saying, yeah, they definitely did this and I know they did it. And so I don't know. I mean, to me it's a fascinating kind of
Only 'cause
window
it was,
into the justice system that um you know, I guess we don't usually see. We usually are like, you have the victims and you have, you know, the innocent people and the witnesses.
yeah, just because it was good for him in that moment. He's completely self-motivating narcissist. So whatever is good for him at the time, he'll do. But yeah, I think it actually makes him credible in that specific circumstance, weirdly.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, so I think the goal is to really just try to lay it out, continue to lay out who he is, what he's done in the past, to show you, okay, what pretext for 1968 trial, what are his motives, who is this guy, and you know, I have my own opinions on that for sure. So you know, I want you guys, I don't want to bias you guys at all in this, so it's very yeah, I agree. When you start to kind of see it, it's apparent.
So were he and Giancana like buddies growing up?
Yeah, so good question. So they were not buddies growing up. So Sam Giancana was the operating boss of the outfit. I think there was a introductory chapter in this first part about him. Essentially, I'm just plugging my laptop in. They knew of each other in a way, and Kane was working private security and he wanted in. And so Giancana said, okay, why don't you join the police force? And then by the time I'm up, you know, you can rise in the ranks. And then it worked out that way. I think there's probably a bunch of people who kind of, you know, laid seeds like that with people in the police department, but Kane is the one that works out and rises right at the exact time that Giancana overtakes the outfit and is his inside man, and dupes Richard Ogilvy in the process. And I think that's a kind of a fascinating duality, is Kane has his hook set in on Giancana and being loyal to him, and then he's got his hook set in on Ogilvy as kind of his you know, vessel to being successful as a double agent, and he successfully does both. He dupes Richard Ogilvy pretty good.
It's just interesting to think about his motives, or like, I'm sure it's just completely self-motivated and he just wanted to be powerful. But the thing that I just brought up before, some of you guys came up on the call to Tom, which I thought was going to be a new revelation, and Tom just went in with all the details with it. But I was like, did you know that Richard Kane's grandfather was killed by the outfit? And so, I mean, for us, because we know Terry was killed by members of the outfit, we are completely opposed to them. So it's just interesting that, amongst many other reasons, but it's just very interesting that he formed an alliance with that same group that killed a member of his family. Just weird.
Yeah, there's
You know,
a.
yeah.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he just strikes me as someone who's selfishly just obsessed with power, right? And he wants power wherever he can get it, on the good side, the bad side, whatever makes him rise and gets
Mhm.
what he wants. And if you think of it that way,
Mhm.
if he saw this person come in and, you know, destroy his family or something like that, he'd be like, I want that kind of power.
Yeah.
So he would join them, right? Like, it kind of makes in a sick, stirred sense. It makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah.
The his grandfather was a member of an organization called the White Hand, and the White Hand was organized by members of just the greater community in that, especially on the west side Little Italy neighborhood, because the Black Hand was wreaking havoc. And Black Hand's in season 4 of Peaky Blinders, by the way, if you've seen it. The Black Hand was a notorious just group of hoodlums that was just taking people hostage and kidnapping people and then just holding them for ransom and doing all these other like it was like a terrorist group. And his grandfather was part of the leadership of this community group that was pushing back against that movement and was killed for it. And I had just reread this last week when Richard Kane was murdered, and we'll get into that, way later. But the gunman actually, and this is just one of those real life things that's bizarre, was wearing 2 gloves. One was black and one was white. It was not intentional, like there was not a message there, but it's
There
just
has to be.
very weird things. No, because
Wow.
no one really thought about his grandfather's death and
Oh,
stuff
come
like
on. The
that.
Italians have
Maybe from
long memories.
maybe from the
long
universe,
memories.
I'm with you, Corey. There's something behind that. That's weird.
Long memories. Yes.
Yeah. And so and this
Ooh.
will be covered in an upcoming chapter 2, but when the FBI, Richard Kane, when he gets in with Sheriff Ogilvy and really starts to hit his stride as a police officer, he starts using wiretaps, which is a very new technology at the time, and he's bugging everybody that under the sun. The FBI catches him doing that, ironically, because they want to be the ones who are wiretapping everybody illegally. And they confront him and they're like, look, we've heard you on some wiretaps. Like, we know you're a double dealer. Like, what's the deal? And he denied it and said, I would never cooperate with the outfit. Or the Italians, the dirty Italians. They killed my grandfather. And he says that point blank to them. And that's kind of his story, is like, I'm not with the outfit. Like, I'm my family is, like Carla said, like completely opposed, to organized crime. So it's you're right. I think Peggy said it best. Like, he just wants the power and continues that until his death, which is really the cause of his death as well. Just wanting absolute power. A really creepy guy. And I will say too, I've gotten to know his half brother over these years too. Not at all a creepy guy, completely opposite of Richard Kane and what we think of. Very, very benevolent old Irish fella. And so that is fascinating too. I just feel like this guy's a complete anomaly. It wasn't how his family was, etc. It's just a complete anomaly of a person. Oh, I got the book right here. Shameless plug for this book. I'll send the link around. Bill, you might want to invest in this. Tangled Web. It's the story of Richard Kane. It's been a great source for me.
And that was written by his half brother, right?
Yeah, correct.
That's crazy.
Wow.
And so just getting
A
back
fascinating character.
Oh.
Terrible human, but fascinating. in
Yeah,
the same way.
Yeah, and I think where we left off with him is, he's in Chicago police. Giancana is giving him orders. Then the 59 trial happens with Accardo, which is also covered in the podcast. And essentially from there, he gets in the bad graces of Mayor Daley and then leaves the country. And his first thought is, okay, I'll go to Cuba. Which was in the Castro regime was taking over, and there was a lot of international interest in Cuba, obviously. And he just went as an amateur spy and just started getting intel for the CIA and was not working for the CIA at all. Just a very, very strange cat. But want to talk a little bit about Giancana too, and why he's included in this. Obviously, being the operating boss of the outfit from the early 60s until the mid 60s and during 1964, I think it's important to cover him, but also because Carla and Terrell and I's father's family has a connection to Giancana, which is really quite unsettling. It's not a blood connection, so we're not sociopaths, although I can't speak for my siblings. They may be sociopaths.
I have my moments.
Yeah.
But our grandma and grandpa Josephine, who we always call grandma and grandpa Josephine, were close with Sam Giancana. Josephine grew up with him at part of her childhood and remained close throughout the rest of his life with him. I was asking around, and I think I covered this in the podcast too, but our dad's side does not want to talk about this kind of thing. So like Terrell, Carla, like Jerry will not talk about this. Who's Josephine's daughter. Diane does obviously not want to talk about this at all. But I got Ron Haddock into kind of a little corner one time, and I was like, tell me the scoop on Giancana and Josephine and Vito. Like, how close were they? And he said, well, I'll tell you one story, but you can't tell anybody else. So this is the trust tree. It's got to stay in here. It's not in the it won't be in the podcast, it won't be in the book, but we can tell it here. One day they were all kicking around in Oak Park, and Vito and Josephine were at Sam Giancana's house, and Sam Giancana was going to collect his street tax from all of the different hoodlums that are around. They have to come and they have to pay a cut of their earnings straight to the boss himself. However, that's divvied up. I don't know, but that was a very, very, organized system. He's like, yeah, I got to go collect my taxes. Vito, you want to come with me? And Vito was like, sure. So Vito went along with him as Giancana collected all of his taxes, street taxes. So the way that Vito told it later was that there was just a huge line of men, and Giancana was just at the end of that line, and they just shuffled through and just started paying money out and went on their way. And Giancana's hand was basically just out. Like, he just was like, thank you, and just kept taking the money. And what Ron said was that at some point, Vito put his hand out and they started putting money in his hand too. And so he's got all this money, and they weren't used to that, seeing that much money, before. And he brought it back to Josephine, and he was like, look, like, I got all this money. She's like, get rid of that immediately. I don't ever want to see that again. Give it back. And he had to give it back. But that's kind of like one of the family stories about being close with Giancana.
I heard her say once, when this came up obliquely, I heard her say, everyone thinks I got the money. I don't have the money. Like that her brother had secretly given her all his money. So
probably because she was smart and knew what the money meant. Like, no.
yeah.
Go to work.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
Keep it away. Keep it away.
Right. So there is that side too. And so if there was any collaboration or any kind of conspiracy cover up that had to do with the outfit, then it would have had to pass through Sam Giancana and probably through the Richard Kane channel. So which is why I'm including that, is he would have had sign off on, you know, if there was any questions about LaJoy or D'Argento or any of those guys who were outfit connected. You know, they were not members of the outfit. They
Yeah.
were connected. They paid the tax of the outfit. Then, you know, perhaps that would have been approved by Giancana. So Giancana Kane relationship is definitely one I wanted to cover in this. For personal
Because he
reasons,
would have known
also.
about the Sears robbery and murder, right?
Well, I don't think he would have. I won't. I don't want to say he would have just known about it, but
At some point.
yeah, I think along the line at some point, I think it's
Okay.
it's a very safe bet. So
So Josephine's mom married Giancana's dad, right? So they were step siblings.
mhm.
Okay.
Who's Josephine again? Your grandmother?
We called them Grandma Josephine and Grandpa Vito. But they're actually
Michael's
my
first
dad's
cousin was
cousin.
Vito Benedetto, and he
Yeah.
was
Okay.
married to Josephine.
Yeah,
All right.
so they're actually my
Michael's
dad's
first cousin.
cousin.
Mhm.
All right.
And we're still close with their daughter, Jerry. Mhm.
Jerry doesn't want to talk about this, but and neither do the people on this side of the family, but they were from the same neighborhood or same area, childhood friends, that sort of thing.
Step siblings. Yeah. Siblings, yeah.
No, I mean, Giancana and Vito and Josephine, they were neighborhood friends, childhood friends.
Step siblings. Yeah. So
Related.
Giancana.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So yeah, Giancana's father married Josephine's mother.
Okay.
So they became siblings.
And then Josephine married into the Benedettos.
I got it.
Mhm.
Kind of.
So when
Yeah.
Tom brings this up, he doesn't get, I mean, he gets a lot of cold shoulder.
Yeah, I
'Cause
don't want to go into
not
it.
enough time has gone by.
Okay.
Tom, how do you know that Jerry doesn't want to talk about it?
Because Dad has told me that, and
Okay.
Ann has told me
Yes.
that. I don't
Okay.
even want to go there.
Yeah, no. Just wondering.
She's
There might
definitely a
still
talker
be some
though.
fear.
She's a
Who
talker,
knows?
but it's funny. She's a
I was
talker.
thinking that. Yeah.
She's a talker, but not about this. It's ironic.
There might still be some fear. She's afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe traumatized a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe shame. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just kind of a code, like you just don't talk about it, and I think that's still around, and it's interesting, but maybe I'll get her in the right mood sometime. And
Well, let me just add this. I'm not sure that you guys know this, but Vito, for his day job for many years, I can't give you the exact, but 60s and 70s, he ran the movie projector at the Mercury Theater in Galewood. And that's definitely was well known even at the time that if you have those jobs, you get them only one way.
like you're connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a movie? Was there a movie projector union, like an operators union? I think.
That makes sense.
I don't know. It makes sense that there would be, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
which would kind of go hand in hand with organized crime. And like,
you're right. You're right. The mob infiltration
it
of
was.
unions.
I think it was.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think unless there's anything else on those characters or Kane and Giancana, I want to cover like the 6th chapter to
Okay.
titled 100 Cars.
Yes.
With a quote from Robert Zilligan, Terry's father. You know, he's an everyday kid, but you know, there were 100 cars in the funeral procession. I think it was just kind of I like that because it really shows, wow, like his dad had realized like, wow, my son was extraordinary. And, think he's kind of an everyday kid. I'm sure he thought he was extraordinary too, but that showing of the procession, I think that really stood out for me.
Yeah, and just the impact in the Chicago community, which you talked about in our first meetings, where this wasn't something that happened in one news cycle and then was gone. Occasionally mentioned after, like this story stayed alive for a long time, in large part because the hero of the story, so-called, was an obviously good, upstanding citizen whose loss really affected the society. Hence the 100 cars, that's a symbol of like the social grief, the widespread grief that for Terry and also for the 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 fate of a good man.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there was one of the articles that you included, Tommy, from the newspaper, and that definitely was the focus of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just as a researcher, like an unbelievable source is that Tribune article from Ridgely Hunt, where you've got all of the sort of firsthand details that are in this chapter 6. Is a good point. Like, talk about Mary. They say, though her self-control is rigid and appalling, her eyes are sunken and almost as blackened as if they had been bruised in a fight. Her capacity to feel has been brutalized almost beyond human endurance. And then, we even have quotes from the kids. Daddy is in heaven, Corey and Terry Jr. And then also his coworkers at Sears too. I find those quotes, very fascinating too. If someone had to be shot, I wish it had been me because I have nothing. Is what one of the folks said. He was a man's man. If a guy could pick a brother, he could be it. He wasn't flippant. He was real down to earth. And then also found this quote from somebody that Terry and Mary knew in England that was published in the Tribune. I think they had read about it and then, sent it along and they published it. So from Mrs. Gill Tillock in Huntington, England, we received the Chicago Tribune magazine for June 14th, and it was such a great shock to us to learn the murder of Terry Zilligan. The article by Ridgely Hunt mentioned that Terry had spent some time in England. My husband got to know Terry even before his wife Mary came over. When Mary arrived, we were so pleased, and she was so charming to our family. We all thought a great deal of the Zilligans. When they left to go home, I personally was shattered. It took weeks to realize that I probably would never see my good friends again, although I never gave up hoping. I wish I could go to Mary now, or she could come here, but it is such a long way from England to the United States. The Zilligans were the best ambassadors to England that the American Air Force ever sent over here. I would like to end by thanking you for such a nice write-up. I love that.
That's so
Yeah.
heartbreaking that she learned about it that way and that she couldn't come and hug her friends or
Yeah.
so sad. And then the ending story of you, Mom, like realizing that your dad was not coming back, and that was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yes, I remember the moment.
Ugh. And also, I think this was in an earlier chapter, but I just felt so like I just understood the feeling that Terry had of like he was robbed at gunpoint at a gas station that he used to
Yeah.
work at, and then like telling himself that he'll never like let that happen again.
That could be
I
that
just like
he
I
actually.
understand. Yeah, I understand that feeling of just having like life events and being like, that's never gonna happen again.
Mm-hmm.
and then doing something completely the opposite the next time you're faced with it.
Hmm.
And then, you know, that kind of overriding, I guess, better judgment in a way for the purpose of righteousness and justice,
Hmm.
which we all understand.
Yeah.
Um, but that's just so sad.
I will say, connected to that, because I am at the end of that first chapter, which, thank you, Tom. It was a really powerful, almost bookend to that moment sitting in my mom's lap, like realizing that Terry was gone. It was really powerful for me to put Terrell in my grandmother's arms and say, like, here's your son. That's like, in my mind, I hold those two things.
Putting Terrell in Grandma Z's arms.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
almost presenting him to her as a, like, now I can give you, Terry back, sort of.
That's lovely, Mama. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Daryl, that's why you should have been a baseball player. No, I'm just kidding.
Damn it. Damn it. Fucked up.
You really let the side down there, kid.
All right.
Yeah, I drive past Terry's where he left, every day going to work basically now.
Do you really?
And
Mhm.
yeah, I used to take a different way, and now just kind of accidentally it made more sense to me to take this way. But and having, obviously you were older, Corey, but Max and Lily are about the different, age difference that
Yeah.
you guys all were.
Ugh.
And it's just funny. I mean, not funny, but it makes you think about, like, just he just was going to work like any other day.
Yeah.
Not gonna come
Yeah.
back the same way.
Yeah.
These kids are doing, you all were doing the same thing. It's just,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. That's the intersection of the ordinary with the hyper extraordinary in this whole story. That all the things that, just were kind of going along in routine way. And then this.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting you say that, because there's a quote by G.K. Chesterton, which is like one of my favorite quotes. I'm not 100% sure why, but I know it's true. And it says that the most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man, an ordinary woman, and their ordinary children. And this story is sort of like, there's a billion stories of why I think that would be true, right? Just in how every life and how it all intersects and stuff. But
Yeah.
like you said, this is just ordinary. And, Terrence Young was a pretty
Mhm.
impressive guy, but still just, he wasn't a senator. He wasn't a,
Right.
anything like that. He wasn't, just an, exceptional but ordinary man. And
Well, and
ordinary
looping back to
children.
the quote that Tom of Grandpa's, that he was just an ordinary kid.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's left this extraordinary legacy that has
Exactly.
branched out into all these different
Yeah.
things. And
Right.
Right.
so, yeah. That's why I have it up in my house. I like that. I was just walking by it as you said that. So I was like, oh.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So one, just to tie it back to March 14th again, is in that sixth chapter, I really think you start to kind of see a lot of confusing things that the Niles police did. Like, they set up mannequins that in the same outfits that were there. I mean, like just a very strange thing to do to jog the memory of people. They had there's a picture of the police officer in the garb. Um, what you have to say is there's really no way to have identified these guys. They were so cloaked in these face masks that distorted their features, hats, trench coats, gloves. So really all you had to go on was these things that I think was really a reach. The police were asking the witnesses about how did he walk? Was there anything funny about his walk? And since the neck would have been showing in that uh costume or the disguise, what was there anything particular about his neck? Was there anything, it's and so there's these like it's kind of a reach. I mean, these when you look at it, these guys went in and they executed a robbery with complete anonymity. But then there are these things that the police are maybe looking for to identify folks that are really kind of a reach. And the biggest one being the shuffling gait or the limp that some witnesses had said the shooter had. And
Mhm.
so they eventually tried to tie that to Peanuts Painsko, who
Right.
we'll pick up in the next chapter and get to know who he was.
Okay.
But there is also evidence that LaJoy had a limp and a very specific story in which he was actually shot in his leg by a fellow criminal. That story was, of course, relayed by the prisoners in their testimony that he walked with a limp whenever he walked around the jail yard. He'd be slow, um, things like that. So just wanted to kind of take that evidence with you and think about it as we go forward. And then also who the roles of these guys in the robbery, because we'll start to read a little bit about the Franklin Park robbery, and they have very similar roles as to what's alleged that they did at Sears in this
Okay.
property 6 months previously.
Tom,
So
was this investigation conducted by the Niles police did the investigation of this murder? I mean, wouldn't they have handed it off to more capable, more resourceful law enforcement groups, FBI, anyone? I
I
mean,
mean,
seems
yeah,
Niles police would be not seeing something like this very often. I know in my town here, we certainly couldn't handle something of this nature. And Niles didn't seem like it was much more than a sleepy community, notwithstanding Golf Mill.
yeah, you're spot on. And so I think that exact question is really, really poignant because then you have, so what do? How do they respond? They respond in these very strange ways. They're trying to, get any evidence, but they have no evidence. And then they have this community that's completely shocked and this outpouring of support and the media still, bringing this.
And it's wouldn't that count as circumstantial evidence, all of that? It's not forensic evidence. So
No, yeah,
what
yeah.
are they doing? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a long shot. They like they wanted to close this case, and so they did have the help of the Chicago police in some capacity because the belief was that these murderers weren't local. They were probably from the big scary city. So they brought them in to a degree, and that's when you start to think when we start to talk about a guy named Bill Handhart, uh,
Mhm.
if you've heard of that name before.
I have. He's pretty notorious in Chicago legal circles.
ab- Absolutely. And it's the surmising of a fellow that I've been in touch with who was a Cook County sergeant at the time. It's his surmising that Bill Handhart would have been helping out the Niles police in apprehending a suspect, and that suspect was Peanuts Painsko, particularly. And so these upcoming chapters in part 2 really focuses on that, and it focuses on, is this something that Painsko would have done? Would Paul Painsko, who was at the time in 1964 already one of the most, you know, famous, infamous, and quite frankly, accomplished burglars in the United States, would he have gone into a mall in the middle of a Saturday and held them up for 30,000 in cash and 20,000 in checks when he could have got that in, half, triple that in one of his jewelry heists that he'd done in the past? Would he have really done something as brazen like that?
Mhm.
It's just a question that I pose, but it's also, you know, contrasted by the police being so certain that he's their suspect.
Yeah.
So certain.
Yeah.
To this day.
Well,
Right.
and then along with that, the thing that's always bothered me with that chapter is the anonymous phone call, right? Because it is spot on from
Yeah.
what we can tell later. I mean, not at the time, we wouldn't have known, which makes me think it's somebody on the inside. Why would you pull that name out of anywhere?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Say this is the person.
Mm-hmm.
So is that like one of the employees because they knew what happened, but they didn't want to say?
Mm-hmm.
Is that somebody on the inside who wants to get this guy in trouble because he doesn't like him? He's making his own power move. Like that anonymous phone call just kind of sticks in my craw.
Yeah. Yeah. And they didn't name Peanuts Pansco in the phone
Oh,
call.
LaJoy, which
Right.
seems to be the one
Right.
from what we know now. I don't
Right.
know that I would have thought that then, but
Well, and Tom, you got the file from Niles Police, and I bet there was no mention of the anonymous phone call in there. Or am I incorrect?
No, though you're not incorrect. When I originally put a Freedom of Information Act request to Niles about all of their files related to the murder, they sent me back a 20-page PDF, which is not big for a murder case. It should be thousands of pages. And all of it was related to the arrest of Paul Painsko
Wow. Jesus.
that they had on him. 20 pages, all condensed. And I was like, I responded to the FOIA officer and I said, with all due respect, this is not the whole file. I need you to dig deeper because there ain't no way that this is 20 pages. And I got a call from a direct call from one of the detectives who's kind of like still around. He's retired, but he kind of works there part-time. And his name was Skip, and he's like in his 80s. And he was like, "What are you poking around this for? And why do you think that it was anybody other than Painsko?" It was Painsko. That's why the file says it's Painsko, and that's that. And he was very, very defensive about me just wanting to have the file. I was very respectful, and I did not push back in that conversation very much. I did very, very light pushback, but he was around at the time and also convinced that it was Painsko. And so we have to think like, okay, these are police officers. And they've got like, look, they do this on a day-to-day basis. Like I'm a complete amateur and it's also 60 years later. Okay, let me like take that with the grain of salt there and look through that lens. And so we have to like just I kind of always check myself a little bit because it's 60 years later. All right, well, what made them be so sure? But then I look at the evidence that they brought to the grand jury to try to indict and charge Painsko with murder, and it's so slim. I mean,
Mhm.
it and that's what part 2 will go into, as well as the Franklin Park Bank robbery, but we'll go into kind of all the evidence against Painsko and what happened.
Okay. Okay.
I think
Well,
his
we'll look
reaction,
forward.
his reaction to that FOIA request is telling. Sorry. Why would you be so, why would it bring such visceral reaction 60 years later if you thought you
That's
got it right?
shocking. Shocking.
If you thought you got it right, you'd be like, let
Right.
me tell you about it, and this is why I think it's right. You wouldn't
Yeah.
be defensive.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
doesn't sit with me.
Mm-mm. Agree.
Maybe we need to wait another 10 years and then put that FOIA request back in.
Yeah, it's strange. I've looked elsewhere for the files too. At one point I saw that Niles turned it over to the state's attorney's office, all their evidence. So I FOIA'd the state's attorney's office and they don't have that. So we kind of have what we have. A lot of that is within part 2 as well. As we go along and read it. You'll see was in that FOIA. And
Okay.
how they went about arresting Painsco, et cetera. But I know we're a little bit over, but is there any other thoughts anyone has? The floor is still open, and it's it's up to you what we want to do with the time.
Tom, I just had one question. I don't want to get too far stream with this, but if this was a mob thing for $30,000, wouldn't that have been, so to speak, peanuts back then for mobs? I mean, would they have sanctioned this? Would this be a sanctioned robbery? I mean, or were these guys so low level that this was maybe their way to get some credibility with the mob? It just doesn't seem like a mob type of thing for 30 grand in loose change.
It's a great question. It's very, very small amount, especially when you think about it. It had to be divvied up between more than 3 people, and then the street tax they had to pay. So what kind of people are doing those kinds of heists that desperate? I would say very desperate people. I would say people who either have debts or have, basically an ultimatum. You got to get any money whenever you can. But it's a great question, because I think if Peanuts Paints go, and yes, they would have had to have those plans signed off. So that's a good question. But I just don't, you'll see the kind of stuff that Paints goes into in part 2, and this just does not match. It doesn't match at all. Some things match, because and I'll explain why I think that they match with a Paintsco robbery, because his former partner, I believe, was involved, but they were pretty desperate.
But
And
didn't Pansco never carried a weapon? I think I got that from a couple weeks ago. He wasn't a shooter.
he wasn't a shooter. He would never fire his weapon. He would keep it. He would have a weapon for, just to show it. And there are direct quotes actually from Paul Paintsco talking about carrying a weapon in part 2 as well.
Okay.
Lucky to have, that says, guns are for scaring people, not shooting. Like he says that as a direct quote, in this other book I got here. So it's something to consider. Now, John Flood, the Cook County sergeant I referred to, he said, would Peanuts have shot his weapon if he had to? I think he would have done it if he had to. But in that circumstance, for 20,000 in checks, 30,000 in cash, I don't think he was willing to risk it all and go to the electric chair for it. So there's all those kinds of things that you all will have to deduce, and come up with your own conclusion. But that's an excellent question, Jim.